Hello and welcome back to Analog Comics. This is going to be my next installment of Do You Know European Comics? And the subject at hand is Marcinelle School, a much lesser known graphical style from Europe. And this turned out to be a much harder video to do than I thought. In fact, I thought that this will be the easiest video subject to have about the European comics. In short, I was planning to tell that did you know that there is other famous comic style coming out of Europe on top of Clear Line. And then I would show you what makes the Marcinelle School what it is and how it is different from the Clear Line. Just lay down the facts and be done with it. And within this video I am going to do that. So if you're only interested of those facts and you don't want to see gray man who looks black and white even in a color screen talking long time about this subject, you can jump right into that section. I try to include the relevant timestamps in the video so you can just jump to the bit you want to see. However, as the whole meaning of this series of Do You Know European Comics is to talk about European comics in more depth, I want to say everything I have to say about any subject, because content-wise for the hobbies within the comics, it seems that European comics is at the moment kind of the underdog. There's so much videos about American comics, Marvel, DC, and manga. And the reason why this video became more difficult than I thought is that it actually taught me a lot about myself. This video put me thinking about my own hobby and the way I see comics. I mean, my point of view. And this thought process started because lately I've been watching a lot of those videos about European comics in English that I can find. I've been binge watching, just finding anything about European comics in English, because I'm interested to see how other people see the European comics. And usually because those channels are in English, they tend to be from English-speaking countries, usually from USA, maybe some from UK, but mostly in USA, which is natural. And I'm watching them not to learn about the comics, because I usually own all the comics they talk about anyway. I'm trying to learn about their view, how they see the comics. When I'm making these videos, I'm not thinking about those comics connoisseurs who already know all about European comics and very possibly more than me. In order to make a better video, more helpful, more useful for the viewer is to understand their position, where they come from, how they see this whole subject. And the thing about Marcinelle School is that most people, I'm generalizing now, most people don't even know it exists. Marcinelle School is usually mixed with Clear Line. It's seen as something same. And this was one of the things that I just couldn't put my head around with. I was always thinking like, why do they mix Clear Line with the Marcinelle schools? Like, why is there no distinction? Why everything is Clear Line or everything is that same cartoony European style? And this process made me realize that I've been a bit of an elitist with the European comics. And then I realized that the core issue of not knowing something is exposure. For example, for me, the differences between the European comic styles is obvious. It's something that just comes instinctively to me because I've been so much exposed to that. I mean, I read those comics before I knew how to read. So for me, the difference between the Marcinelle School style and the Clear Line, for example, is quite obvious. And because it's so obvious to me, it made me blind to the fact that some other regions, let's say in USA, they have not been exposed to those graphic styles that much. So that's why the Clear Line and the Marcinelle School looks the same. They feel that it's just the same cartoony style. That's the European cartoony style. But there's actually a very big difference between the Clear Line style and the Marcinelle School. I have already done a video about the Clear Line style. So if you want to get deeper into that rabbit hole, that video already exists. Clear Line is more stiff. It's more schematic. It's like frozen. It's almost the panels are almost like photographs in a way. There's no movement. It's like a stop motion. Whereas Marcinelle School is more chaotic. It wants to create more of the impression of movement. But before we go deeper into that, I want to talk about more of this exposure, because I think that this is the most important issue within the subject of Marcinelle School, particularly Marcinelle School, because many readers don't know exists, although they might have been reading the style already. I want to be very clear what I mean about this exposure, so I'm going to reverse the roles and put myself in the examination light. Every now and then I watch channels that talk about the superhero comics. I don't really read the big two, Marvel and DC, but I'm aware of them. But there's a big difference of being aware of something and really understand it. It's like a grading. You are aware of something. Like many of American readers, they are aware that Asterix exists, or Lucky Luke exists, or Spirou, or Tintin, but they don't really read it. They haven't been exposed to it, or maybe they just read one here and there and that's it. And this is the way I have it with the superhero comics. When I was a kid, I actually was subscribed to Fantastic Four, and later I swapped it to Hulk, and then I read some Spider-Mans here and there, a few Supermans, didn't really care about them, few Batmans, didn't really care about them. Then I remember liking Ghost Rider when it came out because it was a bit darker. I was a bit older then, and then I liked the darker side of it. But if you look at the Marvel and DC world, the universe, what I was reading, it was just basically nitpicking here and there. So my exposure to that universe of Marvel and DC was really small. It could be said that I was closer to just being aware it existed than really being marinated and like dipped into that world. And then when I'm watching these channels talk about the Marvel and DC, they talk about the household style. Oh, this comic is clearly done with the household style of Marvel. Oh, this is the DC style. And I'm watching there like, yeah, that's it. And then I ask myself, what is a household style of Marvel or DC? And I realized that I can't answer that. I don't know. If someone would put this household styled panel in front of me and ask me to put the facts, write down the facts, what makes this panel a household style of Marvel? I couldn't do it to save my life. And I'm even worse with manga because I'm just learning about it. This really taught me about myself also, this being exposed to something. I realized how far I am from really understanding the larger world of Marvel or DC, which is a massive world. It's a universe in itself. And to give completely another style of sample is, let's say, like white wine. When I first tasted white wine, I didn't like it at all. I didn't like it at the second taste or the third one. And I thought that they all taste the same. It's like, this is all the same. There was something, I was focused on that certain thing about white wine and I didn't like it. But later, when I was more exposed to the white wine and I got to taste more of it, I started to be more sensitive about the differences. There was more variety. And then I learned that, okay, there is actually white wines that are good and some that I don't really like. And I can taste the differences immediately because I've been more exposed to that. I have more experience in that world. And realizing that was a big revelation to me. I kind of knew this, but I haven't really connected dots. It's not like I sit months and months like this and just thinking about comics and all these little things. You know, I jump into this wagon here and now and then. It's just a hobby. So I'm using now as an example the US readers because it's a big market and they have their own comic culture that is built from inside the Marvel and DC, and also the manga is now growing fast there. So I think that's a good mirror to look at in this context of this Marcinelle School. It's not to say that American readers don't know about Marcinelle School, but those people, they really have to be like connoisseurs, really die-hard comic fans who have really made the effort to find the info, because it's not really out there. And at the same time, these are my theories. It's not scientific fact, but this is the way it looks from this side of the pond. And the fact that Marcinelle School is so often mixed with Clear Line only tells how, in how bad situation the European comics is at the US market. It's not the reader's fault if they don't know about Marcinelle School, because it's unfair to demand people to know things that they don't know. They don't even know that such a thing exists. I know that I have many US readers in this channel, and I know that they are very aware and even knowledgeable about the Marcinelle School. I've seen that in the comments. So it means that they are very hungry about this info. They have already made a lot of groundwork to find this info. As an example, I watched one US made video about Asterix, and I went through the comment section, and some of the comments said that I never heard of this comic before. And that's like a big slap to my face, like how is that possible? To me it felt like you listen to music but you have never heard of Metallica or Madonna or Taylor Swift, even as a name, or Michael Jackson. That only underlines how much work there is to be done for the European comics to make them more available, to make them more interesting, to make people want to read them. In Europe, you cannot live and not know about Asterix. Even if you don't like comics, I don't know how you could avoid becoming an 18-year-old adult never hearing about Asterix comics. I just don't see it happen. I don't know how it would be possible. Maybe in UK, that's a different thing. Physically and culturally separate from that Franco-Belgian scene. So this is the kind of revelations that I had doing this video. I really had to put myself in front of the mirror, and I realized where my blind spots are and how I can reverse that feeling to American readers' eyes and see how they don't see what I see between the Clear Line and the Marcinelle School. It's more obvious to me now. And I still don't know what the household style of DC and Marvel are. I didn't go looking for them because I try to keep my focus on this matter. I get easily distracted, and then it's bye-bye videos. So in short, it's about exposure, not having exposure. And usually when there is exposure, it's Tintin, and then the Clear Line term is always mentioned. But when it's Lucky Luke, or let's say Asterix, Lucky Luke and Asterix, those are Marcinelle School style. They are never mentioned. The Marcinelle School style is not really mentioned. And to be honest, Lucky Luke and Asterix, they are kind of extremes within that Marcinelle School. So I can see now much better why you wouldn't put them in the same basket anyway. And Clear Line and Marcinelle School both being kind of cartoony, I think one thing that kind of makes it even more vague is that quite many readers are familiar that there's also more realistic style coming out of Europe, like what Moebius did with Blueberry. And there are others too, like Largo Winch, 13. So when you see those realistic styles coming out of Europe, then the rest, the kind of more cartoony, looks a bit like that's the same. That's the cartoony bit and that's the realistic bit. I think that even kind of adds to the confusion. The history of Marcinelle School is woven very closely into the fabric of the history of the European comics in total. European comics already had their kind of beginning before the World War II, and it grew also during that. But the real kind of explosion happened after the World War II. When the war ended, nations started to rebuild themselves, and people just wanted to have some escapism, you know, something fun to read. And that created a massive demand for content. Comics became very popular very fast, and there was kind of war of businesses. Many comics magazines popped up, and these magazines kept popping up, but in the end, two magazines came on top, and they kind of win the battle, and the whole business was more focused on these two magazines, and they were Tintin and Spirou. And now I'm referring to the magazines. Yes, there is a character and album series called Tintin, and the same goes with Spirou. But these magazines were named after these characters. They were like the mascots, the main characters of those magazines. So they were both Belgian magazines. So this whole kind of Franco-Belgian comic scene really got its start in that Belgian market. So when the battle of these comic magazines ended, the dust settles. There were just two big magazines, basically Tintin, Spirou, like the big two of the Belgium comics market. And because of that, they were heavy competitors also. And as it happened, they both kind of created their own household style. Tintin, of course, had the Clear Line. Hergé, the creator of Tintin, was running the show inside the Tintin magazine. And what I read about it, that he was kind of a very old-fashioned, like a suit and a tie type of guy, and other people had to use the same kind of outfit, and he was pushing really hard for other artists to follow his style, the Clear Line. Then there was Spirou, which is completely different. It's much more dynamic and it's more comic. And by comical in this context, I mean more funny. And the little I know about the history, how that evolved, it was more organic also. Those artists were not pushed to do that, but those gatekeepers who kind of took the artist in and allowed them to do stuff, they really liked these Marcinelle School, this wild style, almost absurd style. And they liked the funny and absurd gags also. So anyone wanting to come in and get job there, to get paid, they kind of saw that, okay, if I do things with that style, I probably get the job easier than doing something else. And the Marcinelle School style is also called Charleroi style. Charleroi. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly. If some French people tell you otherwise, they're just trolling. But both of these names, the Charleroi and Marcinelle, they just refer to the area, the place where the headquarters of publisher of Spirou magazine was located, Dubuis. That was the publisher name. So both of these names kind of refer to that area, but they mean the same thing. And looking back now, the start of the Marcinelle School, it really was an explosion. It happened with 4 artists called the Gang of 4, Bande à Quatre. And those names were Gisè, Franquin, Will, and Maurice. And when this Gang of 4 kind of formed, Gisè was already in-house, inside Spirou, and he was doing basically everything anyway. He was doing the Spirou, the kind of very cartoony style, but he was also doing, he's more known of his Cherry Spring realistic looking Western series. But he's seen as one of the members of this Gang of 4. Then there's Franquin, who made Spirou the success story, what it is today. He made the whole world of Spirou come alive. And within that series, he also invented Gaston, which became its own spin-off, a massively successful series also. And he also invented the character of Marsupilami. It's one of the best comic book kind of animals ever, I think. Will is known for his Tiff and Tondu series. In Finland, it's Tim and Tom. And then there's Maurice, the creator of Lucky Luke. And within that Marcinelle School style, there's a clear link to American comics, because all of these 4 comics creators that started the Marcinelle School, they were big fans of American comics, which is actually very easy to see if you look at the Lucky Luke. If you've seen the first panels, the first adventures of Lucky Luke, it's like a carbon copy of Popeye. So that connection is clear there. But that was the starting point. That was how that was their influence. They liked the Disney style and other cartoony US content, but then they they took it and later they started to evolve into what they were doing more naturally. It became their own thing, and that evolved into something that we know as Marcinelle School. The list of artists that are kind of included in the Marcinelle School, that's a big list. And even I don't agree with all of them. Well, there's Peyo, the creator of Smurfs, and he also created the Johan and Peewee. Those I think are obvious, but the list also includes Victor Houbignon. And when I saw him on the list, my first feeling was like, no, he shouldn't be here, because for me he is the artist of more realistic series like Buck Danny, Redbeard. But I know he's done also some more cartoony stuff, but I never read them. So that's why that was my idea. But that means that I haven't been exposed to his cartoony side at all. I didn't know to make the connection. And of course, Uderzo, the creator of Asterix. Now, Asterix wasn't published in Spirou or Tintin. It was later published in a French magazine, the similar type of magazine called Pilote. But Uderzo did work before in a comic series called Umbahbah. And although it was very Marcinelle School style, it did not come out in Spirou. It was published within the Tintin magazine. Oh, and by the way, there's a third name for these styles. There's a Marcinelle School and the Charleroi School. But the creators, they used to call their own style the Big Nose style, because the noses were big. And that's kind of a common thing, so that was their own joke for it. And once you realize that the big noses are kind of connecting all those styles, it's impossible to unsee it. You cannot unknow it. And I guess now it's a good time to talk about the facts. What makes Marcinelle School style what it is. And I'm also going to compare it to Clear Line, as that is one of the kind of vague areas that many readers they mix up these two styles. So I'm going to show them side by side also, if that would make the distinction easier. First of all, Marcinelle School compared to Clear Line is more chaotic. The panels are clearly more chaotic, and they're not as precise. Like, there's more inking to them. Inking is one thing that kind of clearly separates these things. You have many different thicknesses of lines. It's like they're giving more emphasis to the characters. They separate them from the backgrounds and they become more kind of solid. There's more weight to them. Whereas in Clear Line, every object in the panel is in focus. They have the same weight. And the lines are usually very thin and precise. And then there's the color palette. It's usually more vivid. It's more bright, more in your face. There's not that much limitation with the colors. They can go really overboard with that. And again, compared to Clear Line, it's more subdued. The colors are so that they don't interfere with the line work. Because RC thought that the line work is the most important thing. He didn't first like the colors. He thought that the colors were kind of hindering, messing with his line work. Whereas when you go to Marcinelle School, the colors can be anything. It can be really explosive. And as we talk about the line work, that's also one thing. Frank Wynne is a good example in Spirou. His line work is very talented, but you can also see that it's more freehand. There's like more swipes, and sometimes the lines don't meet. Even if you have an area, there's more like a sketchy lines, and that kind of defines the area, but it's not closed. Whereas when you go to Tintin, it's almost certain that if they draw a shirt, then the lines, they meet everywhere, and the shirt is one closed circuit in a way. But when you jump back into the Marcinelle School, the lines are more freehand, sketchy. I think one good example would be some of the backgrounds in Lucky Luke. That's something I actually noticed even as a child. All those saloons and buildings and the planks that they are made of, they're kind of sketchy and almost floaty. That's how I felt they were. Of course, as a child, I didn't really think hard about, the differences, but that was just something that it was imprinted in me. When I see that Lucky Luke line, I immediately know that that's a Maurice style line. But the differences don't end there. There's a massive, massive difference between how to draw the characters also. The thing about Marcinelle School is that although Tintin might look cartoony, but if you look at Tintin, the backgrounds are quite realistic, the cars and all the engines and all that. But the characters are cartoony. You have to say that, like Tintin, he's like a balloon with 2 dots inside it. But the thing about Marcinelle School that it goes few clicks more to the cartoony side. If you look at the characters, one easy way to spot it is those 2 legs. They have these 2 big legs that are impossible. In Tintin, the legs are usually covered by pants or something you don't really see there, but with Marcinelle School, it's usually like really 2 big legs, and the clothes are almost like another skin on those legs. But those tube-like legs, sometimes they don't even have kneecaps. They are just kind of bended things, like you're bending some wire, and they rarely have any calves. Like the muscles aren't there. They really are just tubes. And one other good example is heads. Many of those Marcinelle School characters, those cartoony characters, they have a really, really large head. It's way too big for their body. And, just look at Asterix. His head is massive compared to his body. But about those 2 legs, I found this one Lucky Luke cover. And I dare you to find any better kind of example of 2 legs. This is it. It's just tubes. There's no really kneecaps, no calves, there's no muscles. It's just bendy. And even Lucky Luke's head is massive compared to rest of his body. And with those big heads, those oversized heads, comes the big noses. That's one of the things. And also big eyes. Again, if you compare it to the Clear Line style, the eyes are sometimes just dots. That can happen in Marcinelle schools too, but then you're probably going to have that more cartoony 2 black legs, big head, there's something. And I think one good way to define the Marcinelle School is that particular comic book style automatically gives you an impression that the content is more childish. It's more gag-like. It's meant for children. And back then, when Tintin and Spirou were competing, that was the case. The Marcinelle School was immediately more children-friendly. And then in Tintin, you had it was more scarier, darker, and also Blake and Mortimer or Alex, the comics done in a Clear Line style. Still aimed at for younger audience, but between them there was clearly age gap. Clear Line and Marcinelle School, those who are aware of them, they sometimes refer to them as opposite things. Whereas those who don't know about them, they see them as the same thing. That's also telling you something. And it reminds you that the reason that they are put as an opposite side, it kind of goes back to the history of Tintin and Spirou magazines. They were competing so fiercely against each other. In fact, they had this kind of a gentleman deal between the magazines that the other magazines wouldn't hire creator from the other magazine if they still had a contract going. So they didn't touch the other creators. They didn't go and try to take them over. The only exception to this rule was Franquin, but he's the only one of those big names who worked simultaneously for both magazines. And to keep it simple, maybe that's something to talk about in later videos. But so this competition made them more separate things. But as I've already seen from these other videos that I watched, many see these styles as the same thing. So it tells a lot that with the eyes of the modern reader, they don't really see the distinction as big as it was seen back then. And also what always happens with styles is that they evolve. They go to different directions as there are new generations growing up with them, and then they come to business and then they add their own thing to it. And what if you were a fan of both styles when you grew up? Then you might actually mix them together and you come up with something else. So the further you go from that beginning of Tintin and Spirou battle, the further you go, the distance, which is time here, the further you go, these differences start to kind of wane. And of course, some of these styles even went out of style for a while. So they kind of disappeared for a while. And this is all natural. The same thing happens in music. If some completely new genre of music comes, like heavy metal, when it once came, it was seen as a separate thing from the rest of the music scene. And I remember in 80s, us metal fans, we thought that that was the thing and you couldn't make it mix with anything else, otherwise it wasn't real metal. But if you look at the metal today, music makers, they put everything in it. You can have an accordion there or a violin, and you can have country music mixed with pop music or metal music. You can mix everything. Usually when any new style emerges, whether it's music or graphical style, people kind of take everything out of it. They just go full in. And then the later generations start to use them more freely and mix them together. And that's all natural. And I took these as an examples of how to use the Marcinelle School in a new way. As I mentioned, the style of Marcinelle School kind of gives you an idea that it's more gag-like, childlike, or kind of children-friendly content. There's the White Tiger drawn by Conrad. This is very Lucky Luke style, but it's also very adult. And she is deadly. There's lots of bodies here. There's blood and so on. The same goes with Walter's Rubin. It's done in the same style as the kind of almost like the gag version of this Natasha. But in Rubin, she shoots the gill. It's done in that very cartoony style, but the content is more adult. And I like that because I grew up with this style and now it's being used for more modern writing styles also. In a way, it just gives the art style more opportunities to exist and still go on. Okay, that was again a heavy dose of info thrown at you, and I know that these might be long videos, but it might be that I only come to these subjects once, and since there is so little info about these Franco-Belgian comics in English, I'd rather do it this way, like the hardcore way, more hardcore way, and then just leave them here for those who are interested. Some people hate long videos and that's why they will never watch this, but I did try to put those facts of the Marcinelle School in one clump and put it into one timestamp for those who just want that info. And my main goal for this video was to show that there is another famous graphical style next to Clear Line coming out of Europe, and that there is a difference and that there's a reason why they are different. There is that historical differences and the competition between these two magazines. And if I were to simplify the history of European comics like massively, then we can see these two magazines as the two starting points. They were the roots where the European comics started to grow. And the way my thought process goes is that if you are more knowledgeable about these things, the whole European comic scene might feel like more familiar to you, which means that it might be easier for you to make this first step into it and start reading it, maybe sampling like what's going on there. Maybe there's something you might like. The ability to see the difference between the Clear Line and the Marcinelle School is only secondary. But if you still don't see the differences and they look the same, that's not the end of the world. It doesn't matter. These two styles have already evolved through time and they've become something new anyway. And maybe I'll learn one day what makes the household style of Marvel what it is, and the same for DC. That might happen also, or not. But anyway, let's not drag this longer. Thank you for watching and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.